I heard a story of a Sunday school teacher who asked her classmates, well, not her classmates, her students, what were the sins of omission? And after some silence and some heavy thinking, one of the kids spoke up and said, "Those are the sins that we should have done, but we never got around to. Sins of omission." Now, I'm pretty sure that's not right, but what I want to talk about today is sin. One of the things that I've experienced as in my life as a Christian and minister and preacher is that I've had conversations with many people, acquaintances, family members who don't go to church, who are not Christian and don't study their Bible, but for some reason they always want to know if what they're doing is sin. I mean, the question is usually, is this a sin, or is this a sin, or why is this a sin, or why isn't this a sin? They're always, they want to know what sin is. I don't understand really. Well, I guess I do understand where they're coming from. They want to know if what they're doing is sin. But if you don't believe in God, if you don't believe in the scriptures, what does it matter if it's sin or not? If there is no God, then you have nothing to worry about. You don't have to worry about sin. Why do you care so much about sin if you don't believe in God? And that's the question that I have to ask people. But what I want to do today is, for those of us who really are concerned with this idea of sin, I want you to think about it this way. Well, let me back up a little bit. If you were to ask a random person out in the street, what is sin? You'd get a variety of answers. Some would say stealing, lying, robbing, murder, rape, all these things. Now think about this. If you hear all these answers, it would be the same as if you were asking them, what is breaking the law or what is illegal? Those are the very same things that they named. So these are things that, at least in my mind, that most people agree on, that most of society agrees that these are indeed sins, or at least wrong. Now, there are some things or some sins that people see as debatable or relative. A couple of them are things like abortion and homosexuality. For the Christian and for most conservatives, we believe that abortion is a sin. We believe that the Bible speaks against murder. We believe that the Bible speaks against homosexuality. So we say that these things are sinful and wrong. But for some, they feel that, well, for those who have abortion performed on them, or for those who actually perform the abortions, or for those who live in a homosexual lifestyle, for them it's not necessarily a sin. For them, it's a choice or a way of life. Well, this is, I think, the problem that we get into when we don't understand the biblical perspective or the biblical explanation of what sin is. Now, for those who don't believe in God, well, as I said earlier, what does it matter? It doesn't matter what you do. I mean, you don't believe there's a God, so you're free to do whatever. You're free to live your life any way you want to. And this is one of the main reasons why people choose not to believe in God. This is one of the main reasons why people reject Jesus, reject the Bible, reject God, because if you don't reject God, you have to acknowledge that there is a God. And if you acknowledge that there is a God, you have to acknowledge that this is his word. And if you acknowledge this is his word, you have to acknowledge that you're going to be answerable. There are rules, there are stipulations, there are regulations that you have to abide by. So you have to acknowledge those things. But the easiest way to get away from all those things and to live your life any way you want to is to reject the Bible, to reject Jesus, to reject God. But for those of us who are really serious about our lives as Christians, about living godly lives, I want to talk about sin, the basic idea of sin. There are a few words that are used in the New Testament that define aspects of sin or sin in and of itself. One of those words is parabasis. Now, this refers to a transgression of a boundary. Think, if you will, a fence. And on that fence, there's a sign that says no trespassing. Now, if you pass that fence, you cross that fence, what you've done now is you've transgressed. You've crossed the boundary. You've gone to where you weren't supposed to go. So this is parabasis. Another word is agnoma. Agnomia is basically ignorance of what one should have known. It's like, well, you've heard the expression ignorance of the law. You're going down the street, you get pulled over, you get arrested for something that you did. Well, I didn't know that. And what does the policeman say? Ignorance of the law is no excuse. You should have known better. So that's another one. Now, anomia basically is how it's pronounced, is breaking the law or not observing law. This is basically outright lawlessness. So this is anomia. Now, the one used most frequently is hamartia. Hamartia means to miss the mark. Now, in the Old Testament, in the Hebrew text, there are also a variety of words that are used to describe sin, various aspects of sin. But the one word that I want to touch on real quick is shata. This really coincides with what hamartia is. Shata means to deviate from the norm, while hamartia means to miss the mark. Basically, you have the same thing. One of them is missing the mark, the other one is deviating from the norm, which are the same thing. So here's what I want you to think about. Think about a bullseye, right? When you're playing darts or shooting at a target, there's a bullseye. And the object is, when you're shooting at the target, to hit the bullseye every time. Now, when we're shooting at a target, it's got different rings on it, and each ring has a number point on it. So whether we hit the bullseye or not, we get points, right? We accumulate points because we're inside those rings. Well, that's not the case when it comes to godliness. When it comes to godliness, when it comes to living a godly life, there is a standard that is set by God. And that standard is the bullseye. And that bullseye is godliness, is holiness. And that's what we're called to live to. Those are the standards that we're called to as human beings, to live to a holy life, to live to a godly life. Now, when we don't live godly or holy, we're set to miss the mark. We're set to be in sin. We're set to sin. Here's the dilemma. We can't do it. We just can't do it. We can't ever hit that mark. We can't hit the bullseye. You and I, as human beings, it's impossible. Think about the Old Testament here for a second. Uh, God gave Moses a tablet of 10 commandments. And the 10 commandments basically have rules and regulations, right? Don't do this, don't do this, don't do that. Now, in the course of that time, people found out that they couldn't keep the commandments. They couldn't. It was just impossible for them to do it. So what God did is he provided for them a sacrifice. He provided a sacrifice that would take away that sin. He says, I realize that you guys are incapable of doing it. So because you've sinned, and sin has a consequence. Sin, the only way to get rid of sin is through blood, the shedding of blood, through death. And so God provided a sacrifice. They would use animals to sacrifice them and transfer the sins of the people to the animals. Well, this went on until Jesus came, until Jesus Christ came. But the point that I'm trying to get to real quick, is that because of that standard that God has is so enormous that it is literally impossible for a human being to meet it. So what does that mean? Well, it's bad news. It means that we're never able to do that. Paul said that in Romans chapter 3, verse 10, Paul said, there is none righteous, no, not one. None, nobody. There's none righteous, he says, no, not one. In verse 23, he says, for all have sinned. Everybody has sinned and falls short of the glory of God. So there's none righteous. All have sinned. We're all condemned. There's nothing that we can do. And since we're condemned, in verse 23 of chapter 6, he says, the wages of sin is death. So we're all condemned. We all fall short. None of us can meet it. So because of the great standard that God has placed before us, we, in our fallen state, in our humanness, are never able to make that target, never able to hit that, never able to reach that goal, never able to live up to God's standards. We find ourselves in a predicament, in a serious dilemma. You and I, because of this situation, should be like the Apostle Paul, screaming out, oh, wretched man that I am, who is able to deliver me from this body of death. That's the dilemma that we find ourselves in. So when we think about sin, let's not think about sin uh, as this or that. Oh, it's lying, it's stealing, it's missing the mark. It's not living up to God's standards. Sin is not being able to do what God has called us to do. That's basically what sin is in a nutshell. So that means that you and I stand condemned before God. That means that you and I are destined to perish. We're lost. But it doesn't end there. Of course, God wouldn't put up such a standard and then put us in a position that we would never be able to reach. Next week, I'm going to talk about how we get there. I want to talk about salvation. When Paul says, "O wretched man that I am, who is able to deliver me from this body of death?" he also answered that question by saying, "I thank God that he can do it through Jesus Christ." So, what is sin? Sin, in a nutshell, is not being able to live up to the standards of God. That's it. You know, if you think about it that way, you don't have to worry about if you're sinning or not, because you wake up knowing you're a sinner. You don't have to concern yourself with, did this thing that I did, is that a sin? You don't have to concern yourself with that because you're a sinner. You're born. You every morning when you get up, you're a sinner. If you think about the essence of what sin is, hamartia, shata, that we're deviating from the norm of God, that we are missing the mark of God, then you'll realize that whether it's a lie or whether it's stealing something or whether it's murder or rape or fornication or adultery, homosexuality, whatever it is, it doesn't matter. It's sin. You and I mean, you think wrong things. You wake up in the morning, you think immoral things. Your heart brings up some things of hatred. I've heard guys say they want to do this kind of hurt to somebody and do this kind of hurt to this person. And it's just, as the scripture says, that the evil things come from the heart. You know, it's not as I think I dropped my frame. What does that mean? It broke up? I don't know. I guess I'll have to check it. Anyway, let me close here before something really goes wrong. I'm trying to keep it short as well. But basically understand this. What is sin? Sin is missing the mark. It's deviating from the norm. Sin is not being able to live up to God's standard. When we can't live up to God's standard, we are in sin. So, but be of good cheer. We don't have to stay there. God provided a way. And so next week, I want to talk about that. I want to talk about what is salvation and how we get there. I hope you'll tune in. If you have any questions, comments, feel free to ask. I just started this, so I might have 1 or 2 subscribers. I would appreciate it if you guys would subscribe. It just kind of tells me that, somebody's listening and somebody cares and hopefully somebody's learning and growing together. You and I will grow spiritually and godly to be the people that God has called us to be. And that is the whole purpose of all this, for me to be able to continually preach, which is what God has called me to do. I wish I was preaching at a church, but at my age and my health, I don't know, maybe the Lord will provide someplace soon, or maybe I'll rent a building and start preaching there. I don't know. But for now, I'm going to do it this way. And hopefully I've helped some of you guys understand this and use this to evangelize, to preach the gospel, to explain to people. I'm trying to make it simple so that you can understand and be able to do what God has called you to do, and at the same time be able to explain to others when they ask the question. So anyway, God bless you. Thank you for stopping by and listening to me. And I'll see you next week. We'll be talking about salvation.